I will officially call to order the study session of the Coachella Valley Water District Board of Directors, March 17, 2026, here in Palm Desert. And we're going to have a script, but why don't we do the Pledge of Allegiance first, and then we'll do the script. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good. All right. So prior to roll call, I'd like to make clear for the record of this meeting, and it should be reflected in the minutes, that at least a portion of this board meeting is conducted pursuant to California Government Code Section 54953, in that Director Bianco will be participating remotely in accordance with the Ralph M. Brown Act and AB 2449, utilizing the emergency clause. So what else do we need to do here? So we do have
Could skip that one.
Sylvia, can you do this? Because
Sure.
I don't have
do
direct knowledge of it anyways.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So Director Bianco, just we'll go through a couple of things, and then I'll ask you at one point for a response in this. So we will confirm that we have a quorum of the legislative body present at this location. We do have a two-way visual system and live broadcasting of the meeting to allow the public to remotely hear and virtually observe the meeting.
So we can't confirm the first one, right?
Correct.
That's we don't have a quorum.
We technically do not have a quorum to allow the board for any actions. That is correct.
Right,
But
so
being
we're not-
that it is a board study session, informational only, and the board
Right.
will not take any vote or action, we should be okay there, because there will be no action that would have to be voided or redone, since there's no vote.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. We are utilizing the emergency clause circumstance under AB 2449, in which Director Bianco has an emergency, a medical instance in which it prevents him from participating in today's board meeting. Director Bianco, could you just confirm that for me, please?
Yeah, correct. I tested positive for RSV, and I had never heard of it either. But it's highly contagious, so that's why I'm here.
Okay.
Thanks for not coming in.
Thank you. And then Director Bianco, could you just advise us or confirm if any individual over the age of 18 is present at the remote location with you? And if yes, please identify them and their relationship to you.
No, there's nobody here.
Okay, thank you. And then the clerk will confirm that this is the first time for Director Bianco to participate remotely within this calendar year, utilizing AB 2449 and the emergency clause. Therefore, today's meeting, or to confirm today's meeting is a study session, and therefore no action item before the board or votes to be taken. And we can now move into roll call.
So roll call, please.
Yes. Good afternoon, President Powell.
Here.
Vice President Estrada will be absent for the meeting. Director Bianco.
Here.
Thank you. Director Aguilar.
Here.
And Director Nelson, as of now, is absent, but if he does arrive, we will notate the arrival time for the record. Thank you.
All right. So are there any objections from board members regarding the virtual attendance at today's meeting because of the emergency circumstances? No, we're okay with it. And Director Bianco, can you hear me well? I imagine, can you see us too, right? It has to be, does it have to be visual both ways? All right.
If we offer that, yes.
I can hear you and see you perfect.
Okay, great. And do you have a copy of the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, and you already said there's nobody else there. Thank
Correct.
you. Thank you. Which makes sense if you're contagious. So I think that covers our formalities to get started. There's one item of study. Oh, is there anybody from the public wishing to comment? Happy St. Patrick's Day. Seeing none. Carla. Oh, David.
David.
Is that green?
It's green, so hopefully I won't get pinched.
Are you a little bit Irish?
A little bit, actually. My wife's side is. But funny thing is, my parents' anniversary was on St. Patrick's Day, so it was always a day that they celebrated. So.
Oh, that's kind of
yeah.
nice. I like
But
that.
my
That's-
wife's maiden name is Kelly, so their side is Irish.
close
We're on
enough.
the English side, so yeah.
all right, well, cool. Go ahead. We have this one item of discussion. No action will be taken. This is the fiscal year 2027 proposed budget and forecast. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, President Powell and members of the board. So here we are on St. Patrick's Day for our update for the 2027 operating budget and also CIP update as well. Based on some feedback recently at the Finance Committee meeting and things as well, what we've wanted to do with this presentation is continue to provide future look of information too. So it does include a lot more information on the 5-year forecast and what it looks like as well. But we'll be going through kind of more detailed information on what the 2027 budget and assumptions look like for that. This is kind of the outline of the presentation today. The first 15 slides or so deal more with the district as a whole. And then we have the individual slides because I know it is a long slide deck, so we can kind of see how we want to move through those individual fund files as we go.
Okay.
But we'll start with those initial slides. So here we are on the timeline. So the budget process did start early this year, November 17th. And so we've worked through the department kickoff meetings, the review of the data through January with department review meetings with finance and with the general manager. We had our CIP study session February 17th, and then we have an update to that with some of the numbers as well. We do have April 21st set up at this point for a potential study session for follow-up items for today. And then the ultimate goal of adopting the budget June 23rd of 2026 with rates being looked at for the public hearings for those in May 27th. So. This slide we've used before, just really wanted to outline the budget process, how the inputs flow in, the input from different departments, and then how that flows through with the department reviews, and then the public involvement through the study sessions. So because it was an early process, I really want to thank departments. They've been really busy with ERP and the implementation that we're working on with that. And we also had an earlier budgets process this year too, so we really appreciate all the departments and their input to make this happen for this about a month earlier than we usually do.
Yes. Great.
And this slide again just shows kind of the breakout of how we put together the budget. So it's built with the meetings at the department level and the individual divisions that are in each. We come up with a total budget amount that's referenced in the middle there and then allocated out to our individual enterprise funds. This year, it's given us an opportunity with Workday to take a look at the cost centers and come up with some streamlining that we've needed to do, and also come up with some different ways to put that into the new system to make that a little easier for data reporting as well. So that will be part of what we'll be looking at in the future for next year's budget. So the overall budget for 2027 is $566.5 million. And you can see we also have the information there for our 2026 budget at the 586.8, and then what we're projecting for fiscal year 2026 at this point. So we are showing a difference in the total operating expenses that we're projecting for 2026. That's primarily related to the 200,000 acre feet advanced delivery for water that we had budgeted for 25 and 26. We had originally budgeted about half of that to happen in 25, half in 26, so about 40 million each year. We'll be receiving the majority of that, or larger portion of that water this year, and so that's about 64.1 million. So that's the main increase that you're seeing for our projections for 2026. And then for the reduction in 27, it's actually because those water purchases are going down. So you're seeing that referenced at about 24.5 million, lower than our current budget.
David, is
yeah,
sorry, is the legal claim contingency accrual item,
Thank you note from.
it's not showing any expenditures in beyond this year? Is that because we anticipate payout all this year?
Not all this year. We've actually put it in. That's a great question. So we usually put it in the current fiscal year as a placeholder. It's not a realized number until we actually do pay those out. So it's basically put in for us to get a sense of what our total expenses would be if it was paid out, and then also where our reserves are going to be. There will be a portion of that that's paid out this year based on the canal, but you'll see that number change a little bit probably as we get closer to adoption, depending on where we're at that point. But You've probably seen it each year move and grow a little bit based on what we expect those to be. So that's why, at least right now, it's not part of the proposed budget for 2027. We don't generally budget for that expense until we know we're actually going to do that.
End of
So
the year, okay.
there'll be a few budget amendments that we'll be taking to the board close to the beginning of the next fiscal year that will actually give us the expense appropriation to be able to expense that. Go ahead and do the rest of that water purchase. So we'll bring an amendment for that piece to make sure we have that covered. And then the other point I was going to bring up too is our external debt service is going up by about 1.4 million for projected. That has to do with our refinance of that interim financing for domestic. So we were originally going to try and capitalize interest for that project, but it would have been a taxable piece of the issuance. So we do have debt service in 2026 that we'll be paying. So we'll bring the budget amendment for those pieces towards the end of this fiscal year.
Thank you.
And the other change on this sheet is the capital improvement plan. So that was revised to a number of 190.7 million since the study session, which is about a 15.3 million reduction. The next slide breaks out some of the changes that engineering went through and looked at. It primarily affects the domestic water fund and then sanitation fund. So this shows the ins and outs of that. There was a reduction in 13 projects with one increase for domestic and then one increase for sanitation project increases. And we included in the presentation a few of the slides from the CIP study session. Let's see if I can get it to run here. That highlights some of the changes that you saw in the last presentation. So if there's questions on these, happy to see if David Wilson would like to come up to do that. Otherwise, we'll keep moving through the presentation. So,
Yeah, I think we covered it last time, so
okay.
keep going.
There we go. Okay, so for 2027, this slide focuses on all the operating expenses. So it's some of the changes we already talked about. Water purchases, the light blue reflects the 2027 recommended budget with the comparisons of 26 and then the projected numbers in the dark blue and yellow. So water purchases were showing 25% decrease, about 38 million. Overall, we're anticipating about a 50% allocation of Table A, which is fairly standard to what we've done in prior years. Salary and benefits, it's about a 4.8% increase. We're expecting about a 3.5% COLA. Still budgeting 570 full-time employees. And then vacancies are budgeted at the top step to allow flexibility as we recruit for those. For 2027, we're still putting about 1 million in for augmented staff and temporary support for the ERP implementation. And then the CalPERS liability, I know we've talked a little bit about this in Finance Committee and in some other meetings too. We're expecting about 17.7 million, $13.1 million annual payment with the discount. And then at this point, we have budgeted about 4.6 million to be able to transfer to the pension trust for that piece. We may be coming back with a recommendation for an additional 400,000 to go ahead and bring that up to 5 million. Wanted to see where this all kind of landed before we put that recommendation for later for this year to keep kind of consistent with what we've been trying to do with contributing about an additional 5 million to that trust fund. For supplies and services, 5.6 million increase. A lot of it has to do with non-recurring professional service expenses. There are some different studies for the Mission Springs and Indio Subbasin alternative plans. Sigma and the Salt and Nutrient Management Plan are some of the larger variances on that. And then I did want to highlight, we did have about a 1.9 million increase in All-American Canal expenses, and this has been increased to fund those extraordinary maintenance projects that we've been working on with IID. So this includes the Pilot Knob project and then the Sludge Pipe project. They've been billing us with this portion based on their calendar year CIP, and we'll be basically having an offset with some of that this year as they start to wrap those projects off. We'll be drawing on those USBR loans that we've talked about. And then contract services, it's a large increase, but it basically has to do with some one-time costs for the ERP, software support agreements, and then also the implementation. There also is about $400,000 savings based on current Naviline support as well, so along with some other savings. For revenue, mostly highlighting just the changes in property taxes. So state water project in general is going to be a total of 181.6 million. Projected revenue, we updated the project or property tax numbers from 2025 actuals with a 4% growth assumption for 2026. So that's why you're seeing those projected numbers a little bit higher in the gold. And then we're reflecting about a 3% growth over 2027. And then also for intergovernmental and operating grants, I wanted to highlight this piece because we've changed the categories a little bit. We've put the curtailment revenue as we receive that into the operating grants category. So there's kind of a little bit of a difference between operating grants and intergovernmental, but that's where we're housing that. We'll be planning on receiving the last 7 million of that in fiscal year 27. And so for just the summary of rates, we have this piece on here. We can go into more details as we get into the different funds, but for domestic for this year, we're recommending a 0% increase, primarily because we want to go ahead and complete the cost of service study that will be done in 2027 to really take a look at rates and where we're at and go ahead and establish the new Prop 218 that we'll need for the next 5 years for that fund. Sanitation is a 0% recommendation at this point. We do have one more year left in our Prop 218 notice and rates. However, because the board's been consistent about those increases with the Prop 218 rates each year at the 8.5%. The fund's in a really healthy position to go ahead and do a 0% this year to go ahead and move into our next cost of service study that we'll need to do that to set those rates for future years. For Canal, our recommendation is to continue with the Prop 218 adopted rates, which would be a 4.3% increase for Class 1 rates and a 2.6% or 6.2%, excuse me, for Class 2. And then for the West Replenishment funds, the increase percentages right now would be based on the current cost of service study. That would be about a 4% increase for West Replenishment, 1% for East, and then it's a slight decrease for Mission Creek at this point. And we can get more details as we go through those funds. We've included this slide the last few years to just demonstrate operating income by fund, and this is really just the difference between the budgeted revenues and the budgeted expenses. For all the funds in the light blue there for 2027, we're expecting positive operating income, and that's the revenue that we can use for either CIP expenditures, for PAYGO, for meeting debt service coverage, paying debt service. So it's important for us to have that positive operating income. The two funds that are showing negative for 26 is the West Replenishment State Water Project Fund, and that has to do again with that 200,000 acre foot purchase. So we were using a lot of reserves for those pieces. For this slide, this is just giving an overall view of the property tax allocation. It's allocated currently to 6 different enterprise funds. We're expecting again that 3% growth for the future years. And some of those points, just to highlight again, like the stormwater tax and then the ID1 tax for Canal are restricted, so we keep those amounts in those funds. The general property taxes, we have the ability to allocate that based on board direction. So some of the changes that we're recommending for 2027 is to, last year we included an additional $5 million to the domestic water fund from the East Replenishment Fund. We were recommending keeping that in there and then applying an additional piece of that to get us to a total of 10.6% for domestic. What this really helps us with is because the primary amount of the water sales is somewhat volatile based on consumption. This helps us stabilize some of the revenues by putting a little bit more into that fund. We're going to be reducing the sanitation fund from recommended down to 2.1%, which is about, or excuse me, 2.1 million, which is where we've had it in the past based on the health of that fund and that they have adequate operating reserve. And then we're putting some money back into the East Replenishment Fund, bringing that back to 6.1, since that at the time was basically we were discussed doing that as a one-time transfer to domestic. And so working on what that fund would need to go ahead and reestablish that.
Okay.
So the majority of the percentages don't change, but the ins and outs for like East and sanitation and domestic, you can see those down below where those allocations would end up based on growth and then those changes. And this slide gives a couple different slices of debt service over the next 5 years based on current assumptions, and then the principal outstanding balance in the lower table there. So just to outline again, domestic water, it includes the 1.4 million for the interim financing. And then 2027 right now includes that we've kind of carried forward for a while, a proposed bond issuance of about 37.2 million. The timing of that and also the sizing of that still to be determined, but it's one of the things that we'll be looking at with the cost of service study to see if that still needs to happen or if that is the proper size for what we'll need to do. Fiscal year 2028 reflects the payoff of those Series 2025 notes. So they're for 3 years. So you see that numbers very large in fiscal year 28 domestic, having debt service of about 39.5 million that year. Just wanted to highlight that as the main number. That will be paid off, but we're expecting to have USDA interim finance or the final financing for some of those projects also available that year once those are completed. The other ones are pretty straightforward. Stormwater, we have the WIFI and Series 2022 bonds. East replenishments for the Oasis project. The note I would highlight on this is that debt service does step up in 2028. It's one of the reasons we're getting the property tax a little bit higher in that fund again. And that will be when the taxable portion of that debt issuance is paid off, and then we'll be beginning to pay principal in 2028. So you'll see that principal balance for East replenishment start to lower from 2028 to 3031. We'll be paying principal on that.
David, will there be, as there is no increase in the rates for domestic water next year, will that affect our ability to debt finance in any way?
Well, it'll be part of the decisions that we'll have to take a look at. I think when we've put together the budget for this, it does have adequate debt service coverage for the current amounts that we have at this point. I think when we do look at the size and what we would need for debt issuance, it would be really dependent on what those future years look like and coverage for those years. So what we've built in, at least for our projected numbers for this, would be what would bring us to the proper amount of debt service coverage. And then also that plan, which is in our policy for reserves, to bring that back to in compliance within 5 years. So those would be some of the things we need to discuss as we're looking at that debt issuance to see what would that be and then what would that mean for rating. But it would be very important that we could demonstrate the fact of the willingness to keep rates where they need to be to make sure we have debt service coverage for anything that we'd be issuing.
Thanks.
So, yeah, great question. For sanitation, it's the SRF loans that we have for a lot of the non-potable projects. So I have kind of the listing on there if you want to go into all the details on that. We do have one SRF loan application right now underway for $33 million for our latest round for the 24-25 non-potable projects. And then we did get approved for the $26.9 million loan this year for WRP 7 and the improvements that we've needed to do on that. So as we draw on those, debt service starts to build. And then Canal, the USVR loans for the irrigation laterals. As those projects are completed, that debt service increases as well. So those are the slides for kind of the all district look at that. We can go into the individual funds if you would like me to go and start. So we have more data on domestic, canal and sanitation, and then a little bit more high level on the other funds. But if you want me to continue, we'll go ahead and keep working through this.
I think so, yeah.
Great.
I think we should.
Okay. So slides are very similar to what you've seen. So for domestic, 115.3 million in operating expenses. It's about a 4.5% increase overall. This gives kind of some of the breakouts of how this kind of the overall pieces apply to domestic. So salaries reflect a 5.5% increase. Supplies and services about 3.1 million. Chemicals were budgeted at 1.1, which was a larger increase over the 2026 budget at this point. And then contract services, we have some of the breakouts on that. Some of the changes in contract services that would be kind of the recurring theme in these have to do with the ERP. So some of the one-time costs and then some of the ongoing costs for implementation that we have. For revenues, so they reflect no increases we've talked about for 2027 with projected consumption of around 38.5 million CCF. As we've been looking at where our consumption trends are for 2026, we've revised that down to 37 million. For the first half of the year, it's been a little bit lower, so that's at least what you're seeing in the yellow bands there of what water sales would look like. The service charge portion is the fixed portion of that, so that remains fairly steady. And then one of the reasons we were looking at property taxes is we're budgeting at 10.6 million. So you'll see that change there. But again, to help with some of the stability that we have when consumption's lower, that we need to deal with and make sure we have coverage for. This fund also receives about 3.9 million in debt service related to that interfund loan that we have for the Mid-Valley Pipeline. So the West Replenishment Fund pays this fund about 3.9 million a year, which helps us meet debt service coverage and any of the PAYGO needs that we have for capital.
Do you know how many years are left if we continue at this rate?
Yeah, I believe we set that up originally for 15 years, and I want to say I think we have about 12 left.
Okay.
I think so. And so this slide provides just a look at consumption and where our averages have been at this point. So it's been interesting the last few years. 2022 dropped off there, but we've had 2 years of around the 41 million CCF and a couple of years within that 36,000. So you can see there's a lot of change that we've had between the years, where we're projecting that is slightly below our average right now at the 37 million. And we've kept the 5-year forecast pretty steady at about that 38.5 million, just to kind of look at it. That yellow band represents where we've been over the last 10 years, so kind of the high and low. So we're still probably being a little more on the aggressive side of it, but looking at what we need to do for future too, it looks like that's where we've at least tried to stabilize our projections on consumption. Right now, looking at some of the numbers on that, I think Tier 1 consumption was down fairly slightly, about 2.4%, Tier 2 about 7%, and it's mostly been in those upper tiers that we've seen at least larger percentage drops of like 17% for Tier 3, 28% for Tier 4, and 25% for Tier 5. The bigger part of that, though, is it's a smaller volume of our overall that we do, but that's Tier 5 is about 1.9% of our total volume. Tier 4 is about 4.8, and then Tier 3 is about 15%. So seeing it on the upper tiers at this point, but it definitely is down a little bit lower than projections for this year.
Hey, David, this might be a question more for Pace than for you, but I seem to recall that the average consumer, about 80% of our ratepayers are within their Tier 2 budget. Do you know if that's about accurate still?
Yeah,
I mean, you just cited some numbers.
Yeah,
so
I believe that was pretty similar. I'm not sure if someone here knows that answer for sure from the Pace, but I think. But yeah, I mean, you can definitely say that the tier volume on those upper levels is much smaller. So,
Okay.
but we are seeing, it seems like at least on a year-over-year percentage decline, higher percentages on those upper tiers, even though it's not as much of the components of volume. So,
Got it.
yeah,
Thanks.
Tier 2 is about 52% of our overall volume, and Tier 1 about 23%.
From a revenue standpoint. Got
From
it.
a revenue standpoint, yep.
Thanks.
And so this slide just gives the breakout that we have for the bill. This would normally have, like if we had a rate change in that, but just the breakout again of 20 CCF average customer, the portion they'd pay under Tier 1, Tier 2, and then their monthly fixed charge. So coming up with an average bill of about $39.75. So the comparison between other water agencies, this shows again where our current rate lands. So CVWD's rate for 39.75 up to the high that we have for our comparisons here for Eastern Municipal at about 104. And these rates were reviewed again as of March earlier this month. And so these slides have a little bit more detail on some of the ins and outs based on this. This is where we've normally shown kind of the comparisons of no increases versus our recommended increases. So you'll be seeing in the red, that would be if we don't do any increases over the next 5 years. And then what a recommended rate based on all the inputs that we have, at least at this point, based on CIP, based on future operating expenses, what it would take to essentially bring the fund to fully having full reserves restored by year 5. So the next slide deals with reserves, but this one's operating income. So the recommendation at this point, again, 0 for this year. It basically remains stable of operating income of about 3.7, so a small amount. But we also do have the interfund loan revenue of 3.9, which gives us adequate coverage for our 1.4 million a year in debt service that we have for 2027. 2028 would require a larger increase. Right now, looking at about a 20% increase to be able to actually keep our reserves where they need to be and then start moving towards the right direction for that. And of course, larger increases in the future years. The note to make on this one as well is it's based on the CIP as presented. It doesn't include Chromium 6 or the PFAS mitigation costs yet. And there's also, of course, different projects that are still out there that are not in the funded 5-year CIP, including some of the Sun City projects, I think phases 6 through 10 as well. If we look at the reserves chart, similar look, but the dashed line there shows that this is what our assigned reserves or targeted reserves would be. So you can see under this scenario with those types of increases, 0 obviously is unsustainable, but we would be drawing down a pretty significant amount of reserves in 2028, and then would basically start building those again in 2029 to get back up to what we would need to fully fund those target reserves at about 67.9 million by 2031.
Yeah, those are some pretty high annual increases, which is not unusual for what we've seen
Yeah,
projecting, because it's,
projections are always projections, but right.
yeah, they're conservative usually. Hopefully these are. Okay.
Yeah, and part of the cost of service study, one of the things we'll be identifying too is this is really looking at rates to make up for PAYGO capital at this point for the CIP needs and operating expenses as well. So there's maybe some other strategies that we may want to take a look at through that process, including a larger debt issuance, which may be able to fund some of these projects as we go through that piece of it.
Okay.
So there are different options that we aren't presenting today, but just wanted to give the way the math works at this
Right,
point, as it looks
yeah.
like that would be the increases that would be
No,
needed.
that's good to know.
And before we start on Canal, I just want to kind of remind the board that the domestic operating expenses are basically more than twice the operating expenses of any other fund that we've got. At 115.9 million, I mean, Canal comes close to half, sanitation comes close to half, but domestic is clearly twice as
Yeah.
much as anything else.
Sure. A lot of moving parts. Okay.
Okay, so for Canal, so based on the way allocations work on labor, it's a larger increase on salaries and benefits. So for this fund, we have about a 10.5% increase as we're looking at it. It mostly just has to do with allocated labor. And when we went through the plan at this point, that was where it landed based on kind of historical looks. Supplies and services, about a 13% increase. So where this comes from is about 800,000 for the fallowing program. So we're still doing that piece, but there is a revenue offset for that. And then we discussed earlier the 2 million increase in All American Canal O&M based on those extraordinary maintenance projects. So we will be receiving some of that offset in 2027. We'll be looking at doing our first drawdown for that pilot knob project, which will be around in the $600,000 range for 2026. And then that next project for the sludge pipe, our portion is about 2.7 million. So we'll be seeing some of that for the next year, depending on when that project finishes, that we'll be receiving in proceeds for that to offset some of the expenses that we're going to be incurring. And then contract services, as we talked about with the ERP, this would be the Canal's portion of where those cost changes are. So it reflects a larger increase, but half of that is one time. On the revenue side of it, it's pretty flat. Basically, overall, a decrease of about 185,000. So this is again with the recommended cost of service rates, the Prop 218 rates. So it's showing we would be recommending at this point a $1.72 increase for the Class 1 rate. Class 2 rate would be a little bit larger increase, $5.41. You may recall with last year's cost of service study, it ended up being, I believe, about a 17% decrease from prior for the Class 2 rate. And then the Class 1 rate was about, I think it was about 4%. So this keeps us steady on the plan of keeping those rates separate and then working on moving those forward with the increases that were in the study. For the intergovernmental and operating grant revenue, so we mentioned this before, the $7 million for USPR curtailment revenue. This will be our last portion of that expected to receive in 2027. And then this fund will also be receiving additional revenue again from the East Replenishment Fund as it begins to buy water again for replenishment. Some of the other pieces we have in here, we have about 2.7 million budgeted for under one revenue. Kind of a standard budget, about 1.8 million for IID power proceeds. The 0.8 or 800,000 we mentioned for the fallowing program. And then the Coachella lining project, we have about 600,000 budgeted for those reimbursements. And then property tax revenue of about 17.6 million. So this fund still receives a large amount of discretionary and non-discretionary. I think the ID1 portion of this is about 5 million. So
David, isn't the IID money larger than that?
it's been, we've actually received more than that. Yeah. So it's been kind of an up and down piece of it. So depending on each year, if we kind of look at the trends, it's been more towards that. Some years much lower, but that's been kind of our average budget for that. So we don't have a real good indication of what that will be for 2027 at this point, but
What was the most recent payment?
let me take a look here.
2.3, 2.5.
Is that them? Yeah.
Something.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, it was around there. And I think the year before it was a larger piece, as I recall. So, yeah.
okay.
And so for same kind of look for consumption, you'll see kind of an increase here, and that has to do with the Oasis sales, or not, yeah, Oasis sales, and then also the sales to East Replenishment as curtailment begins to go there. So we're forecasting about 307,000 acre feet. And then in Oasis, we're continuing to show as those customers come online, additional revenue for that as well, additional volume. So this is the comparison slide with different agencies for agricultural water comparison. So where CVWD stacks up with others. So
Hey, could I just comment on this slide?
sure.
Can we do two slides? This is obviously class 1 rate, but then we have the class 2 rate for golf courses. And I don't know what that slide would look like, but because golf courses around California have various ways of irrigating.
Sure.
And I mean, first of all, on this slide for the class 1, which is really agricultural, can we add like Yuma and Phoenix? Because it's also a little misleading in different climate areas, but those are desert areas.
Sure.
know.
Yeah, we can definitely take a look at that. I don't know how much available there was on those other classes, but we can definitely take a look the next time.
Yeah, I
we
don't
look
know
at
how
rates
you're
to
gonna,
see.
but it would be interesting just to kind of call around and see how, or maybe ask the Golf and Water Task Force to help us out. But
Sure.
I'm curious to see how our class 2 rate compares to other golf irrigation rates around California.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do some additional research for that, and then can bring that back as well.
Yeah, I mean, these are all fairly warm climates, but the other factor is precipitation, which obviously the desert areas have
Sure.
less. Yeah, and heat.
Yeah, when we look at golf courses, it's probably going to be either a municipal system or a non-potable recycled water system,
Yeah,
or a blend. but
yeah. I
there's
mean,
not a lot of
if we
color
picked, I bet you somebody in the golf, those golf guys could
Yeah,
point to some useful information.
yeah. We'll touch base with Craig and Kevin. And see what they
Yeah.
got.
Great.
So it'd be a separate slide.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, it'd be a good look, though, to compare
thank
that rate as well.
thank you.
Okay, so a similar look that we did for domestic, but again, just looking at operating income and the recommended rate increases, and then what that would look like. We'll look at the reserves in just a second here, but the difference between the recommended rates and no increases is fairly small. It's around 900,000 for 2027. The recommended increases are down there again of 4.3 and 6.2. This slide is the reserve. Look at that again. So that does affect reserves by about $1 million if we either do the rates or not do the rates as a zero for 27, and kind of what the future rates look like that. This fund is above its target reserves, but we also do have the curtailment set aside, so I have that referenced as well, of that about 58.4 million that we have in there at this point, and trying to preserve that based on board direction at this point. So
Yeah. I mean, the domestic fund definitely has a much more, makes a better case for a rate increase than this one does. Yeah. Okay. I mean, for the period that we're looking at,
Right.
I'm not talking about 1 year.
sure. Okay, so moving on to sanitation. So 53.5 million on the expense side, so it was about 6.3% increase. Salaries and benefits, their allocation of this reflect about a 6.5% increase. Contract services, it's a recurring theme here. So ERP is the largest in and out of that. And then we have a few other expenses, so increases for pump overhauls of 250,000. So the recommendation was one high volume, one low volume pump per year for the next 5 years. So that's included in that piece of it. And then about 120,000 increase for critical equipment refurbishments at the warps. For operating revenue, so it is a decrease primarily due to the property tax transfer that we did. So again, we're not recommending a rate increase. This fund's very stable since it's not based on volume in the same way. So there's some small account growth for this, but the main points on this is that we'll be going through that process of a cost of service study for this fund as well, to take a look at all the future needs. We do have potentially a debt issuance still scheduled out in the future for a few projects in the $38 million range, I believe. So we'll see if when that's needed and how that folds into that study when we look at the new rates on that. And same look at this right now, so no increase for 2027. We have right now programmed about a 3% increase throughout the forecast would be what we would assume we'd need to do for this fund at this point to make sure we continue to meet debt service coverage as well. You will recall with this fund, because it's primarily SRF loans, we need to meet not only the coverage of the 1.25 that's in our master resolution, but also that maximum annual debt service number that the state requires. So we need to meet coverage a little bit higher. It's one of the reasons we really watch the operating income for this fund, very healthy for 2027 down there, showing about 10.5 million, which allows us that adequate coverage as those SRF loans are fully drawn out, and we have those. But that small increase keeps that rate fairly stable, or that operating income. And then for reserves as well, the plan is to continue to use reserves for the projects that we can do so. So you see that decline over the forecast period in both the recommended and then also the 0% rate increases. But both for that period, we remain above our targeted reserves. And this is the comparison for sewer with the different agencies as well. And we can quickly move through the rest of these, not as many slides on these. So for stormwater, 6.6% increase in expenses, salary and benefits fairly flat for this fund. Supplies and services 7.5%, and this includes an increase of 368,000 for equipment usage for the stormwater drainage crew cost center. And then contract services here again, there's a couple different things here. The primary one is that $365,000 agreement for the CV Link maintenance. And so that's the amount that we'll be paying CVAG on that annual basis, along with an inflator on that to take care of maintenance for the CV Link. On the revenue side, it's primarily property tax driven, not much change in that. Its revenues increasing by 1.4 million due to use of reserves for internal borrowing. So that's one of the things you're seeing I think it's supposed to say decrease there, so I apologize. But 1.4 million or percent due to the use of reserves. So this is the fund that we're borrowing for the West replenishment portion of that 200,000 acre feet. So our reserves are lowering. We're losing a little bit on interest income, but we will be actually getting that through debt service from that fund. So from the West Replenishment Fund. So moving on to West, since we're just talking about that. So water purchases. So again, very, very big decrease due to that 200,000 acre feet pre-delivery water. Salary and benefits, it's their portion of that. The contract services. So then the other expenses is what we were just talking about. So this fund does pay 3.9 million in debt service to domestic for the Mid-Valley Pipeline project, and then we're expecting for 2027 to begin 1.8 million in debt service to the stormwater fund for that west replenishment portion of the 200,000 acre feet. So it's about 19.1 million, I believe, that we're borrowing on that piece of it. That will be paid off over the next, I believe, 15 on that.
Okay.
So then for revenues, replenishment charges, we're expecting that about 120,190 acre feet. This is including the proposal for the cost of service study of moving that rate from 165.37 to 172 for the forecast period. So that's about a 4% increase and $6.63 per acre foot based on the study. And then the non-potable water sales, we're estimating about 26,500. Property tax growth still for its portion that it has, and then investment earning decrease due to the use of reserves. And that was part of the strategy for this pre-delivery waters to utilize West reserves, and then also the interfund loan to pay for their portion of what would be needed. Just look at volume at this point. We're still forecasting in some slight decreases over the forecast period as new non-potable connections come online. And then for Mission Creek, again, small fund, small changes. Right now we're showing an increase in expenses of about 36,000, water purchases, and just a few different things because this is a shared facility with the Desert Water Agency. There are some maintenance things that we do share for billing on that as well, but a lot of this is mostly allocated costs based on some of the departments. And then for revenue, we are projecting a small decrease this year, and that rate going from 135.52 to 135. This fund has always had healthy reserves, and so at least for the forecast period, we're expecting any of those volume changes that may be these minor revenue changes to be absorbed by either the reserves or demand as that goes, but they'll be well above their reserve target. And then the forecast volume as well, so we're still projecting what we've historically done of about 4,434 acre feet. Last few years have been a little bit lower projections so far. We'll see where that ends up, but small amount of pumpers out there, so it does, volume is affected a little bit, but that yellow band has been kind of the 10-year trend of where that's taken place. So then for East, an increase in water purchases due to the resuming curtailment activities at that fund. So we're expecting a half year of that. So it's a step of about 19,500 acre feet that will be purchased from the canal fund, and then bringing that back up to about 39,000 for the future years once we're fully up there from the annual basis. Salaries and benefits, their portion reflects a small change, and then supplies and services about a 2.8% increase. And then contract services, again, same story with the ERP costs on that as well. For revenue, expecting just a budget estimate of about 102,000 acre feet. This does include that rate increase from the 72.27 to 73 as part of the cost of service study for the recommendation. Property tax revenue, so we're bumping that up, that additional 3 million to allow a little more space in there for the debt coverage that we need for this fund for that debt issuance that we have. And then non-potable water sales, estimating that about 4,600 acre feet. So the decline here that we're showing for kind of historical and future projection is related to the Oasis customers that we talked about earlier. So I think we're maxing that out about 26,000 acre feet by those latter years. It's been a little bit delayed as this timeline's done, so we've tried to keep kind of the forecast current with what we're seeing at this point, and then what is expected for the future on that. And then just the last few slides on State Water Project. So big decrease on the expenditure side. Again, the 200,000 acre feet pre-delivery. But as we talked about earlier, 50% allocation to Table A. And then we'll continue to revise this data as we know this data seems to change a lot towards the end of the fiscal year, and any assumptions that we'll need to have and any updates we'd have for kind of final adoption on this fund, but fairly steady at this point. And then on the tax side of it, recommending keeping the current levy at the 11 cents per hundred of assessed value for 2027. And then we'll continue to revisit this as different costs and clarity come on with Delta Conveyance and some of the other projects that are out there. And with that, next step, so we talked a little bit about this before, but for April 27th, we have this scheduled for any follow-up items that we'd have that we can come back with. The public hearing and approval for all of the rate adjustments will be on May 27th. And then we're expecting to adopt the budget on June 23rd at this point. And with that, happy to answer any other questions.
That was a very good presentation. Somebody remind me why we're doing that. I hope it's not because of me. The May meeting is on a Wednesday instead of Tuesday. What is the reason?
Holiday.
The board
A
meeting?
Memorial
Holiday.
Day. Oh, the
Yes.
day. So we don't want to do it the day after. I got you.
Yeah, it's a little bit challenging for staff to come in after a
To
Monday
do that
holiday.
day, yeah, I got you. All right, so that May 27th is actually a Wednesday. Because of Memorial Day. Okay. Yeah, good presentation. Really. Well, not just, I mean, the whole thing, not just the delivery, but very good.
Thank you,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
I don't have any. Anthony, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I would agree. That's the best one we've ever had.
Well, I was going to say Carla probably did the best one we ever had, and then now David might have just beat her. But I know you work together.
Yes, they do.
All the good input comes from Carla.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, it takes a lot of prep to get to this point, obviously, and it just seems there's a lot of pieces, and it seems like it all is tied together very well. So I do appreciate that.
Well, it does have to come together. So being tied together works better.
Yeah.
But so I guess the next question is, does the board believe we need to have a follow-up study session on this on the 21st? We could hold the date in case something else comes up. But if there's really no questions here,
You know,
and
it's
nothing
hard
else
for
comes
me
up,
to say that because two directors are not present.
Understood.
So I feel pretty, I mean, I made my comment earlier about how you make a great case for rate increases in domestic and not such a great case for the 5-year period in the canal fund. And yet the canal fund's the one that has the rate increase and the domestic doesn't for the first year. So that's kind of interesting. I think that was, it's obviously going to be at the May 27th meeting that we're going to talk about that more.
Yeah, we'd be noticing that since it's within our Prop 218, but because of the AB 2257, we'd be noticing the rate increase essentially for that date as well. So that would give us the time based on board direction at that point.
No, I
whether or
know.
not to
I mean,
include that, so.
the domestic fund and our friend Mayor Taylor. Did we scrub that letter? Did you see he sent an email? Topper Taylor?
Yeah, the mayor of
Indian Wells. We had a meeting with them last week,
It's,
and he sent out an email to, I'm imagining, most of the residents in Indian Wells, although I didn't get it. My wife forwarded it to me. And it was really accurate, but it talks about, the rate potentially doubling because of the Chrome 6. And people are stopping me on the street now, and I'm like, well, what is that real? Is that real? And I'm like, well, it is. I mean, unless the court, we win in court, but that domestic fund is going to have a tremendous rate pressure, especially if we don't prevail on that Chrome 6.
well, based on the presentation, there's already rate pressure on
Oh,
the
no.
domestic funds.
I know.
So it's just gonna get
John,
compounded.
I would just say for the April 21st meeting, I could meet or not meet, but if staff needs a meeting, if there's something that develops between now and April 21st that would trigger the need for a board discussion, I would say, let us know.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep it on the calendar for now.
Thank you. Yeah. I
We'll
agree.
pulse the members that were not here to see if they would want to have a repeat of this. And then the folks that are here probably could be absent for that one. So,
They would have to watch the tape. I think there's a tape, right? They can rewatch this.
Yes.
They might have to do it live.
No.
Yeah.
no.
Good. Well, this is our one item of study. I think that wraps
It's a
up
wrap.
this meeting. And with no further business, we're adjourned. Yeah.
I would agree. Very, very good, David.
Wrong. I got you wrong.